they were just focused really on trying to, I guess, blame us. You know, one of the most damaging things that could then happen, convince the general public as well that we were somehow involved.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. I'm going to be doing a 3-part series on what Detective Amaral thought was actually going on and what his book was about. In a very real sense, the McCann case is a parallel, an echo, if you will, of the JonBenet Ramsey case, in the sense that there's also supposed to be an intruder, except that there is a door that is not only unlocked, it is open, and yet the intruder decides to break through a window, and the window's got shutters, and it turns out that there's no damage to the windows or shutters, and no sign of forced entry, and of course, no sign of an intruder either. And then on top of all this, there's this allegation of some kind of sexual aspect to the crime, when there's not only no evidence of that, but there's no evidence of Madeleine herself. In the JonBenet Ramsey case, at least you've got some sign, although not a lot, but some sign of that kind of interference with JonBenet. In the Madeleine McCann case, you have absolutely no sign of that, and yet it is part and parcel of the narrative. And in a real sense, the JonBenet Ramsey narrative and the Madeleine McCann narrative hold hands in a particularly weird and fictitious way. And of course, in both cases, the parents were suspects in the eyes of law enforcement for some time. Now, although Britain's most famous case, the Madeleine McCann case, took place 10 years after one of America's most famous cases, the Ramsey case, both cases have a lot more in common than I've even mentioned here. The detective in the McCann case believes there wasn't a real abduction. In other words, it's not only that someone have been wrong there, but you actually have something that was possibly staged, fabricated, simulated, in his words, in order to make it seem like a stranger was involved. In other words, someone, in his view, went to a lot of effort to choreograph, to almost create this theater that made it look like something had happened, right? In the Ramsey case, you have something equally crazy with a 3-page ransom note when JonBenet was in the house the whole time. She was never kidnapped. In other words, you have a kidnapping there that was staged as well, and certainly a possible scenario that the ransom note was bogus. In the following analysis, I want to share some comments the lead detective in the McCann case made in July 2008. They may seem not particularly shocking or strange today, but in 2008, these statements he made got him into very hot water, and in a short time after making them, the McCann sued the detective into silence. And then 13 long years of legal battles ensued. In January this year, so earlier this year, the McCanns could have taken that battle further by appealing the result of the European Court of Human Rights, and they did not exercise their right to appeal. And that then led to the case being listed as definitive, meaning finalized, on the European Court of Human Rights system. And this meant effectively that Amaral had won, had the final word, I guess, in that long legal battle. But where did it all begin, and what was it that upset the McCann so much? Well, we're going to look at an article published on the 24th of July 2008, very close to the time that Portugal's discovery was finally released and law enforcement were finally allowed to talk about that case. And all of this was published in an exclusive interview with a publication called, I think it's Correio da Manhã, a Portuguese publication. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. As I say, I'll be doing this in a part series, so look out for the other 2 episodes. If you're enjoying this analysis, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. By the way, I will be providing a link to this article in the description. So let's review the interview with Amaral in July 2008. He was asked questions, and I'm going to quote his responses verbatim. The investigation was reviewed. Gonzalo Amaral regrets that an investigative review of the inquiry was undertaken. In the first interview, during which he speaks about the process, he defends that Maddie died at the Ocean Club. The book is launched in Lisbon today and promises to launch the controversy again. Well, it certainly delivered on that promise. Correo de Manha, as the case investigator, what is your thesis? Amaral answers, the little girl died in the apartment. Everything is in the book, which is faithful to the investigation until September. It reflects the understanding of the Portuguese and the English police and of the public ministry. For all of us until then, the concealment of the cadaver, the simulation of abduction, and the exposure or abandonment were proved. Now, I've got to say, I've written 5 books on this case. My personal opinion is that Madeleine didn't die in the apartment. She died under the balcony of the apartment and then was taken into apartment 5A, which led to evidence. The next question, what led you to indict the McCanns over all of those crimes? He answers, it all starts with an abduction theory that is forced by the parents. I think what he means is that they insisted on this theory. And it's quite similar again to what the Ramseys did. They also insisted on a kidnapping. And do you remember when Patsy says, it doesn't sound like a kidnapping to me, and John sort of looks at her. Anyway, the abduction is based on 2 facts. In other words, the abduction that they are putting forward is based on 2 facts from their side. One is Jane Tanner's testimony that she says she saw a man passing in front of the apartment carrying a child. Now, if you've been watching a lot of my videos, I provide in 3 images, a newspaper headline that reads, why did cops waste 5 years looking for this man? Something like that. And the crazy thing with Jane Tanner is the guy was actually depicted as walking away from the apartment when actually it was Dr. Julian Trotman carrying his own child from the creche, the same creche that Madeleine's parents could have used. And by the way, this was another doctor who was there, and he was carrying his child from the creche after dinner back to the apartment. He was staying in the same apartment complex. And Jerry had apparently played tennis with the same doctor. In any event, what is strange is in the sketch, Jane Tanner has this doctor walking away from the apartment with the child in his arms when he had to have been walking towards the apartment. So just quite a strange twist to that tale. Then the other thing is the bedroom window, which according to Kate was open when it should have been closed. It was proved, this is Amaral's words, that none of that happened. Now, I've gone to Portugal myself and I've tried to open windows, and all of these windows have got shutters. The wind tends to blow. It's just a cultural idiosyncrasy in Portugal. They've got shutters, and you can't really manually open these shutters, although as Westerners you think that is the way it's done. But they kind of have a conveyor, kind of a belt, and that actually allows you to open the shutters quite easily. When you do open them, they make a really loud racket. They really make like a loud clattering noise. But if you look at photos of the shutters, they're not damaged whatsoever. And one of the early narratives was that an intruder broke in and damaged the shutters to get to Madeleine. And this is what he's saying. It was proved that none of that happened. And then the next question is, how was it proved? Amaral answers, Jane Tanner is not credible. He's saying that he doesn't believe Jane Tanner's version. She identifies and recognizes different people. She starts with Murat. Later on, someone else is mentioned according to the drawing done by a witness, and she already says that is the person, completely different from Robert Murat. What he's saying is that Jane Tanner was saying, the person that I saw was Robert Murat. Then she says it was somebody else. And anyway, the bottom line is they did investigate Tanner Man. for about 5 years, and then and this is the British investigation, and then they decided that that was not helpful. And even the British investigation decided that that was not credible or actionable. And then they changed the entire investigation to a later time and to a different part of Praia da Luz. Jane Tanner's testimony drove the abduction theory. That's the question that is put to Amaral. Amaral answers, in order to advance into that direction, it would be necessary to give her credit. There was no other indication of the abduction. And the issue of the bedroom window where Maddie and her siblings slept is vital. It leads to simulation. This means whether or not it was open when Jane says that she saw the man carrying the child, the little girl's mother, Kate, is the only person that mentions the open window. By the way, when law enforcement checked the fingerprints, I think the only fingerprints they found on that window was Kate's. Next question, does that undo the abduction theory? There lies the solution. To be closed or not is a strong indication for simulation. And why does one simulate abduction rather than simply saying that the child has disappeared? She could have opened the door and left. Do Kate's fingerprints reinforce the simulation theory? They are the only fingerprints on the window and in a position of opening the window. Next question. Did Kate have suspicious attitudes? Amaral answers, she goes out for dinner and supposedly leaves 3 children asleep. She returns, one is missing, she goes out, leaving the window wide open with the twins asleep, and the night, according to what she says, was very cold. Now, I was in Praia da Luz myself in May, up until the 3rd of May. This was in 2019. And I must say, although the days were pretty warm, the nights were pretty cold, pretty chilly, and you would want to have the windows closed. The other thing to mention is, and this is, I think, what he's trying to say, is that if you come into a room and you feel like one child has been taken through a window, I don't think you're going to leave that room, and you're not going to leave the children alone in that room and run out and tell everyone that your child was taken. I think you're going to either close that window, or you're going to close that window and take those 2 children and then kind of go out. And maybe you would shout from the balcony, or maybe you'd make a phone call, but you wouldn't really want to leave just after one child is taken. You wouldn't want to leave the other 2. And that is apparently what happened in this scenario. I think the ridiculousness surrounding that is similar to the ridiculousness of no Ramsey fingerprints on the ransom note. Now, on the one hand, you might say, well, if their fingerprints are on the ransom note, they must have written it. But on the other hand, you would say, well, surely they read the ransom note if they're innocent. They picked it up, handled it, handed it to one another. Well, there's not a single Ramsey fingerprint on the ransom note. Next question. What about Maddie's bed? Amaral answers, it carries no signs that anyone was in it, nor does the chair or the bed under the window, and there are no imprints from strangers. Now, that's also quite interesting. There's no fingerprints from strangers on the window or anywhere else. And the other thing that is quite interesting is that Amaral believes that Madeleine wasn't actually in her own bed. Bear in mind, they couldn't find any hairs, skin samples, DNA. They couldn't get any of that from Madeleine's bed. And so what that sort of makes you kind of wonder is, did Madeleine actually go to bed that night? And you actually have a similar situation in the John Benet Ramsey case, because her bed looks so untidy, because her bed looks so disheveled, essentially, and there was a pillow downstairs in the kitchen. There's also a theory that Madeleine never actually went to bed that night. Next question. The reconstitution is missing. It was not carried out for 10 or 15 days after the facts because the resort was full of tourists. We trusted that it could be carried out at a later date. It couldn't. Now, I think what they mean by reconstitution is they were going to do a reenactment, that the Tapa 7, everyone was going to take their positions and kind of reenact everything that happened. But unfortunately, May 3rd, when all of this happened, was just before the full tourist season, and then the next thing, the resort is full of tourists, and ultimately the McCanns and the Tapa 7 didn't involve as a group, as one collective group, didn't ever do a reenactment other than for a television station where some of them, I think, participated. Next question. Did you request data about the group? I think that's another way of asking, did you ask for information from the Tapa 7? Then they say at 8 a.m. on the 4th, so the first thing in the morning on the next day after the incident, the request was made to the English liaison officer, but the data never arrived. Now, I'm not sure if that data, is it cell phone data? Is it some kind of statement? Anyway, then he said, what did you want to know? Amaral answers, who the people are, their antecedents, and the child, whether or not there are any complaints against the parents or others, how she behaved in school, to find out if she was the target of any kind of mistreatment. Next question. How important is the Irish witness within the case? Amaral answers, he explained where he and his family had seen at 10 p.m. on the 3rd of May a man carrying the little girl, and it wasn't Murat. They did not see the face, but they described the athletic and clumsy manner in which the man carried the child. That was back in May. Amaral responds, when the McCanns returned to England, the witness, watching Jerry get off the plane and walking across the asphalt carrying his child, had a realization. By the manner in which he walked and the clumsy way that he carried the child, he is almost certain that it was the person he saw that evening, says he and, say, other members of the family. What did you do? Amaral responds, on the days before I left Portimao, we were taking care of that trip to Portugal. Then the hearing of that witness was requested through a liaison officer from the Irish police in Madrid, which took months. During that time, the witness was approached by persons that are connected to the McCann staff. I don't know with what intention. They felt pressured. Later on, the hearing arrived, and he maintains the probability of 70 to 80% that the person he saw was Jerry, who carried the little girl towards the beach. This is in this article. Couldn't that have been included in the rogatory letter? Amaral answers, it could and it should. The ideal would have been for him to come to Portugal as a key witness, just like the couple of doctors that described the situation in Mallorca. Now, what is quite frustrating with this is you kind of get the sense that this case could have been solved immediately. If someone had just had the courage to come forward, the case could have been solved very, very quickly. Almost, once again, a parallel to the Mo Wilson case, where someone there had come forward sooner. Perhaps things could have been sorted out sooner. And then I think we'll end off with this last question. Once the abduction theory was set apart, how is the death theory built? Amaral answers, with the elements that exist, we could only reach an accident, a natural death, any cause without the intervention of another person. So what he's saying here, and I agree with this part, is he says, no one killed Madeleine on purpose. No one murdered Madeleine. She died in an accident. I agree with that. He goes on to say, we were cementing evidence and advancing to understand what happened to the little girl's body. Also, based on information from the British lab about residues that were found inside the car that was rented by the McCanns. And we'll deal with that aspect in the next episode. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.